if you wanted to model, if you want to model clothing and stuff like that, okay? So here's my high res. I have a low res. I need to get this guy into Maya or whatever in a lower res version, or maybe even in Substance Painter, so that I could start painting it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to UV Maps, extract texture maps, new operation. And here it's giving me the option, what do I want to do? Do I want to transfer if I'd painted him from the high res to the low res? Do I want to create an ambient occlusion map, a vector displacement map? A vector displacement map is the map that we use to create the ear. A displacement map, which is what you would bring into Maya, which works really well, or a normal map. So let's say for right now I want to do a normal map. And this would be for like if I want to bring it into Substance or a game engine or stuff like that, right? So right here it's asking me a few things. Number one, it's saying, what's the target? The target is the low res, but I want to change it, and this is important. I don't want the lowest res version because that's going to be way too low, you know, for what I want. Level 1 or level 2 would be good. Let's say, fine, we'll do level 1. Level 2 would be better, but let's say level 1. The source is the high res, level 6. My method I'm going to use is subdivision. I'm going to use a 2K texture for a normal map. Anti-aliasing, let's use 6x. 8x would also work, but we're going off of tangent space normals, and we're going into Maya. And the output is a texture, and I'm going to name it righty then. I'm just going to put it on the desktop right now. Well, it's already here. I'll tell you what, I'll just copy this and I'll remember where it's at. Copy. And I'm going to call it test guy NRM for normal. Okay. And then I simply say extract. Tangent quality of the target is low. This can lead to artifacts. What do you mean it's low? Oh. Gotcha. I may have to redo that. Let's see. So let me watch this. I'm going to page down now because it added the normal map, and I'm going to drop it down to like level 1 or 2. So that's the character at level 1. This is with the normal map. That's without. That's what the normal map is doing. This is my low res version. This is the normal map with the low res, on the low res. Look at the detail we're getting up here. That without it. See that difference? Now, I'd probably use level 2. Level 1 is pretty low for the look I want, but it gives you an idea like, wow. So now all I'd have to do is export out. Let me select the character. File, export selection. And I'll call him test guy low. And I'll just save him into here, because that's where my normal map is. And actually, while I'm at it, just so you can see, I'm also going to export out the high-res version so you can see what it's what it is. Because when you're retopologizing, you bring in the high res. I'd bring in the high res for a few things. Number one, I could bring in the high-res mesh to generate normal maps and stuff in other programs or displacement maps, but I also can bring it in so that I can actually utilize it so that I can model on top of it to get a nice low res. So what retopologizing is that this guy is too dense. There's no game that is going to handle an 8 million polygon character right now unless that character is the only thing in the game. You know, and even then it's like you don't really need to. I'm going to export out selection, which is the high res, and call this one high. And it's almost doing that. So now if I go back into Maya, file, import, and I'm going to import the high res, which is 344 megabytes just for that one file. And it'll take a second, because it is a big, beefy file. Wait for it. Still thinking. It's a big file. It's going. You're talking crazy, man. Still thinking. There's my uber dense guy right here. See? If we turn on wireframe, just switching to wireframe is making it think. Because it has to draw all those lines. Look at that. That is a dense model.
Yeah, I don't even see the wires.
There they are. So, obviously you can't do anything with this thing, but here's what you would do to retopologize it. Go back into flat shaded mode. I select the object, and then I tell it that I'm going to make it live. And I've got symmetry on. Now you'll notice I can't select the object, but what I can do is go to my modeling tools and start creating. Look at that. Check this out. Oops. Ooh, you are checking. There it is. Yeah, it's just having a hard time. I probably should have brought one that was a little bit lower than the highest version. But essentially what you're doing is you would use this. Now that it's live, it's sticking to the model. So then you would just go in and you would start to create the low-res version of this model with the proper edge flow that you want. And that's how you would retopologize it. And this is what they do when they're doing like the high res to the low res models to build things out.
So it's just redoing the topology.
Yes. And so that's where you would go in. Uh, 3D model topology.
Look up.
This. So you'd create the edge flow for it. Or if you had modeled it so that it was using that dynamic tessellation, you'd have to do this to it. And this is showing you how those areas are modeled and how the edge flow would work. See? So when you're actually, one thing you can look at is like, oh, 3D model edge flow. See? And then you could see how the main lines, how they would loop onto each other, how they would intersect with each other. And this is how you would actually properly model it so that if it's animated, it's going to actually deform in a realistic way. So when you're working on games, that is like the eyes, then a mask around the eyes, the mouth, then this mask around the mouth, then that connects to here, and so on. And that's how you would actually, when you're modeling it out, the edge flow that you want to have as you're doing it. But it starts with that. Now, if I just wanted to pull it into Substance, let me save this. And say New, 2K. Select the model. And I want to add, since I exported out a normal map, I'd bring in that normal map. And it'll bring in the model, the low-res model, plus the normal map should be plugged into it. Actually, I don't see it. Where are you? Where are you? Boom. There it is. So that's it with the normal map on it. And then I could start painting it in here, and I have the normal map from Mudbox that I can actually just jump in and now start texturing. And yeah, it's like there's some distortion here because I changed it so much I probably should clean up the normals because the ears are different from what they originally were. But it gives you the idea of how you would actually, then I could start to just paint directly onto this model. Start with oh, come on, where are you? Skin face, start with a base skin texture, and then start to go from there and tweak it out. So yeah, I'd probably use level 2. Level 1 is really low. Really, really low. It makes me sad. So, and then you can get to like, oh, I want to like really start to detail it out, and you start to see the differences in the texture. This was one that I textured inside a Substance and then brought in and have built a skin shader that's actually has light subsurface scattering like you guys use for the grapes, making the texture, you know, kind of show. And then you saw our little friend here, which is doing the same thing. Mudbox sculpt with Substance and Mudbox texturing. And then just plugging things in the right places. So we'll be spending the rest of our time, two things. One, you guys can continue in your leisure as you work on stuff for your portfolio pieces to continue to work on your rooms. But your primary thing right now, because I'll be grading your rooms, what you have now, and I'll be grading your final turn-ins at the end of the class. But your next big goal, the project we're starting now, is your character. So basically, that's the priority right now, and any adjustments like, oh man, I want to work on my room a little bit, and additional, you just turn in an update at the end. And then we have on our last day for critique, you guys will have your stuff posted up, and we'll look at, you'll make a quick layout and show your characters and your renders from Maya. The cool thing about, if you do Mudbox, you can do a turntable animation. which is you can render out the character turning around. You can do it in Maya. It's just if we're going to be rendering in Arnold, so it would just take forever to do it. So I'm not worried about that. We'll just do stills. And some people did like, oh, you know, I want to show it in Substance because I liked how it's not that difficult to get it up and running in Maya, but sometimes you'll find like, hey, I really like how it looks inside of Substance. So if that's the case, Substance has its own renderer called iRay, which is similar to Arnold. And it allows you to do some nice renders. So if your stuff looks really good, you can render out images out of there too. I'm not too worried about, like, you know, which, if you want to show some stuff inside of there that you did. A lot of times, like last class, different people did some renders of props they did. They liked the way they looked in Substance, so they rendered those out. So here's Hans, the guy we'll be working on next class. So we can go over it together. Even though his name is Hans, I just, and it's supposed to be, you know, German, I always think French. There's just something about him.
It's the long face. And taller than mustache. Twirly mustache guy.
But we'll go over basically texturing him, and you can use him if you want to texture. I have no problem with that. And it's a good exercise because he's already UV mapped. He has the head, the helmet, the body. So it has a few individual pieces, and we're going to go over how to use multiple materials to actually texture him. Yeah, you could tell I didn't texture his head because his helmet was on, but either that or he has the most ineffective save me from a fire helmet I've ever seen. So,
Make sure as soon as the helmet comes off, it's going to be very intimidating.
it's like the helmet caught all of the explosion. It's just poor Hans. But so we could see in all of this, the benefit of Substance, all these little details and everything, is that it is non-destructive and you can always change things. That's what I love about it. So you can actually go in and you see like, oh, the stitches, that's one material there. The collar, the belts, the fabric. See that? So the blemishes and stuff that I put on it. There's the base fabric. And you literally can go in and just change all the colors and stuff that are inside there. So we'll be going over this next class on how to set that up. Here's some notes, stuff to think about when you're doing, if you're not going to use Hans, you're going to use your own character, or my box if you have to tweak it, or if you're like, oh, I'm going to model clothing and stuff, or armor, or whatever the case. Think about how you organize your UVs. Hans is set up in a very specific way where there's his jumpsuit, there's his belt, and things are separated and can easily have, oh, this is fabric. I'm just going to drop a fabric texture onto that UV shell. Oh, there's his belts. I'm going to just easily drop a texture onto the belts and start working with it from there. And then I can have all these details that I painted in are separate layers on top of it. Right? So you can then just go in and start adding those details as you like. So if I know this is going to be one metal and this is going to be another, I'll separate those two. And you could see with the helmet how there's these different layers on each portion that I can shut off or on. See? So that's on that piece there, and it's attached only to that section. Turn it on. Boom. And each section is like that, and together they make a complete material when you export it out. So he's pretty good. Most students use him. You can use some other ones, but he's all, like I said, all those from algorithmic are already UV mapped. You just got to go in and start creating and making the textures, and we'll go over setting that up. The guy from Mudbox, if you don't modify him too much, he's UV mapped and you won't have to tweak the UVs. If you do kind of go nuts on him, then you may have to, at the very least, just unfold the UVs a little bit and repack them a little.
And you're transferring them from Maya. Can you UV map them from Maya?
Yeah, you have to UV map them in Maya. So you'd bring them in there because I don't. Yes, technically Mudbox lets you UV map, but you don't. No. And Substance just won't let you do it. It's like, nah, dude, that should already be handled by the time you get to me. I don't want to do it. So, so yeah, and just lay them out inside of there, and then you'll see it's like, oh, it's pretty. You can do some pretty wicked cool stuff. This one also to note, it's not all one. Do you notice it's not all one material, one texture? So it's divided up by the materials. There's one material on his body, one on his head and skin, like, his head, one on his helmet, and one on his shoes and the pipes here. It's not trying to squeeze everything into one texture file. So it's organized by 4 materials that are being used. So think that way. You don't want a million materials, but he has 4 so that you can get a higher resolution for each one. One for the body, one for the head, one for the helmet, one for the shoes, period. And then that way, most of these, like, the head is mostly all skin, so it's just it's very easy to have like subsurface scattering and skin on there, right? That there's no metal or anything like that. The body is mostly cloth, some metal. There's a little bit of skin, but not much. It's right there. The helmet, all metal pieces, reflective pieces, different things like that, leather, and same for the shoes. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your UV mapping, if you have to do UV mapping for whatever character or objects you put in. Does that make sense? And then let me know if you have any questions.